Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai-dai. 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 Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu לעשות בדברי תורה לעשות בדברי תורה הפוך בה לעסוק בדברי תורה ידע-די-די-די-די-די 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 yada-di-di-di-di. So today we are focused on one of my very favorite Torah portions, which is Kirushim. And the word Kirushim means holiness. Jessica, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yes, I wonder if you could quickly clear something up for me. At the end of the blessing, is it hafopa?
Hafochba, which means turn it over again, because the idea.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, not faux pas, like the mistake.
No. It's like if you want, hafoch means to turn over, because each year we turn over the Torah and keep reading it over and over again.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Sorry. Okay. Thank you.
No, I'm glad you asked, because if you had the question, I'm sure other people did as well. So I appreciate that. So this week we're focusing on Kirushim. You might recognize the word Kadosh in there, which of course means, anyone remember what Kadosh means?
Holy?
Holy.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why this Torah portion, specifically the verses that we're going to be looking at today, are called the Holiness Code. It is right there, smack dab in the middle of Leviticus, which of course is the middle book of the Torah. And so in a lot of ways, it's thought of as the heart of the Torah. That right there in the middle of this book, we have some of these rules by which to live our lives. And in the commentary for today, we're focusing on the midah of Hakaratov, which means seeing the good, or sometimes is translated as gratitude. So we're going to get to all of that in a little bit. But before we do, I want us just to read the Holiness Code itself. It is a little bit long, but I'm wondering, I can make this a little bigger. How is that for everyone? Can you see it?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. I'm wondering if anyone would be willing to read as much of it as you'd like to read.
I can start.
Thanks, Irv.
Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, your God, Adonai, are holy. You shall each revere your mother and your father, and keep my Sabbaths. I, Adonai, am your God. Do not turn to idols or make molten gods for yourselves. I, Adonai, am your God. When you sacrifice an offering of well-being to Adonai, sacrifice it so that it may be accepted on your behalf. It shall be eaten on the day you sacrifice it, or on the day following. For what is left on the third day, by the third day, must be consumed in fire. If it should be eaten on the third day, it is an offensive thing, and will not be acceptable." Scroll down a bit. And one who eats of it shall bear the guilt of having profaned what is sacred to Adonai. That person shall be cut off from kin. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not pick your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I, Adonai, am your God. You shall not steal. You shall not deal deceitfully or falsely with one another. You shall not swear falsely by my name, profaning the name of your God. I am Adonai. I am Adonai. You shall not defraud your fellow Israelite. You shall not commit robbery. The wages of the laborer shall not remain with you until morning.
We're almost there. Do you want to stop her, or do you want to keep going?
I'll finish it.
Thank
You shall
you.
not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. You shall fear your God. I am Adonai. I am. I'm not sure about the punctuation there.
Yeah, it's I am Adonai, period.
I am Adonai. You shall not render an unfair decision. Do not favor the poor or show deference to the rich. Judge your kin fairly. Do not deal basely with members of your people. Do not profit by the blood of your fellow Israelite. I am Adonai. You shall not hate your kinfolk in your heart. Reprove your kin, but incur no guilt on their account. Shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against members of your people. Love your fellow Israelite as yourself. I am Adonai.
Okay, so there's a lot in these verses. And I just want to see, based on this text, and I sent this as a text sheet for you also, because I can't show the whole thing on the screen. It's simply way too much. But within these verses that we just heard, and thank you for reading that to all of us, are there any things in particular that you find meaningful or inspiring, or just things that you have questions about that you're just not quite sure what it means or what the context is?
Well, you shall not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. And that made me think these are souls, and even if they can't hear and that person is deaf, there's a part of them that knows that something unkind is being done. And plus the fact that God knows, and it's not honoring that godliness within all of us.
Beautiful. And there's so many different applications to that, right? Like that metaphor of like a stumbling block before the blind is used in so many different places. And insult the deaf, the same kind of thing. How often are insults made to someone who, you know, maybe there's an assumption that that person can't understand? Like things like that happen all the time.
It's very easy to be impatient with people with disabilities like hearing and vision. People just tend to do that. It's good reminder. I have trouble with, in my own personal reading of this and being taught all along the way that you had to honor your mother and father. And we had a Shabbaton there at the temple, and the rabbi from also chaplain up at Mount Sinai Hospital. And he went into this. He said, you don't have to like your mother or your father, but you still have to honor them. And you don't have to invite them to Shabbos dinner every week either. I mean, if you don't like it. And I did that in my own life, but I got criticized for doing it. So, I don't know how other people feel about that. You have relatives that don't care for it, but yet you do still pay attention to what you've been taught.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting one, and I'm curious to hear what people have to say. If we look at the Hebrew, right here, it's translated as revere. This is the Hebrew word, tira'u. It's not even the word for respect. It comes from the same root as yirah, which means awe or reverence, or also fear. So that's kind of an interesting word to be thrown in here. I know within the commandments, we have the commandment to honor our parents, and that word is different. But here, it's tira'u, and I'm curious if that has a different kind of implication for us, or how that feels to you, Irv.
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far. So this is my personal life, but it's I guess it's touching a very old and exposed nerve. But I did learn that the only commandment that has a reward is honoring your mother and father. I forget right now what the reward is, but if you're all the other commandments you don't or you do. But if you do this one, you do get a reward, which I think is unique.
Yeah, anyone else have anything they want to say in response to that?
I have a comment about the last sentence there about love your fellow Israelite as yourself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think it's kind of interesting because I always thought it was, love your fellow man, or, not specific to the Israelite. And I'm just wondering how this relates to, don't be a stranger to the stranger in your land. It just seems kind of odd that it's specific just to Israelite.
It is such a good question, Keith. And the rabbis, actually, there's a lot of debate about exactly that, right? The Hebrew here says re'echa, which means like your neighbor or your fellow. Oh. And when the Torah was created, of course, it's in kind of a tribalistic time. And so it's members of your people really would be seen as like your neighbor or your fellow. And so I think that's why that parentheses is in there. But the question is, how should we understand it today? Can we be far more expansive than that?
Yeah, I think we can be. We should be.
Yeah. And there were rabbis even from many, many centuries ago who were like, nope, this isn't good enough. We need to be broader, right? This is all human beings who are created in the image of God.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, Jessica.
Well, my observation is that the phrase or the sentence, I am Adonai, doesn't occur after every one of these injunctions, these commandments. And did they just get tired of writing that down? Did Adonai get tired of saying it? Or does it separate the ones that are really important? I mean, they're all really important. But I just wondered about that because everything the Torah has written is meaningful. And if they leave something out, that's meaningful.
It's a great question. Anyone have any thoughts on that? Because there could be lots of different potential answers to that question, I think.
I think that's a question that falls into one that would cross a rabbi's eyes. That's very interesting. I not have thought about that.
Because I mean, I could offer like a few different possibilities here, and perhaps some of you have some more too, right? Some of the times that it says, I am Adonai, what precedes that could actually be paired together, right? Like if we see here, you shall not render an unfair decision, do not favor the poor, or show deference to the rich, judge your kin fairly, do not deal basely with members of your people, do not profit by the blood of your fellow Israelite. Like there could be an argument that those things are related to one another. And so the I am Adonai is underlying all of it, as opposed to saying that one is more important than the other.
So like categories.
Yeah, I mean, that could be one way to understand it. That doesn't mean it is the way to understand it.
Rabbi, you were reading about love your fellow, and somebody put in Israelites, and you said love your fellow can be expansive. Does that include, you say includes that God loves everyone. Does that include people you don't like, your enemies, everything else?
Well, that was true within Am Yisrael also. It's very clear, actually, right? We don't have to like someone or agree with them in order to show them love and respect, right? And I know that could be a hard thing, especially in modern day society, because there's not a whole lot of love going around for people with whom we don't agree, just as a larger cultural thing. I'm not speaking to any individual, but just as a culture, that doesn't seem to be present as much as perhaps it could be. But the Torah was always saying, love your fellow as yourself.
Right. I always like to just start with 19:1. I am your God, I am holy, therefore you are holy. Just that is enough for me to think about every encounter, everything I do. You are as holy as God is holy. Just think of it that way. Almost what would God do?
But did holy, when this was written, mean what holy means today?
Good question.
What does holy mean today?
Wonderful. Torah leaves it all up to us. I think it's wonderful.
Well, I mean, yeah, Rabbi Catherine, did you
I-
want to say something in response?
I don't think that we have defined what being holy means today.
Well, godlike, isn't it?
Yeah.
What is that?
What's up to us to look at
Perfect.
every encounter?
Is it?
Yes.
I'm
Well,
not
what-
sure if God is perfect. I'm
No.
not sure about that one.
We don't see
Okay.
a perfect God in the Torah, actually. We see a God who makes mistakes and says, oops, I better not do that again.
Well, here's a dictionary definition: dedicated or consecrated to God or a religious purpose, sacred. So it doesn't, so like the Holy Bible. So it's sort of like an adjective.
It kind
Yeah.
of points to how we would lead our lives. We can't be God, God is God, but what can we learn from what God says, especially in this Torah portion? You know,
Mhm.
I think it's, for me, what it says for me is to stop thinking about yourself. Like it's constantly, you're thinking about other, you're thinking about your parents. It's, and then at the end, you're thinking that there'll be no other idols and there'll be no one else other than my relationship with God is by the way I treat my neighbors. Right. That's what I got out of it.
Yes.
That's,
So it's far more, it's forcing you to be more expansive in your thinking.
Mhm.
yes. And that my thinking could be wrong and it's okay to adjust or make adjustments to make so that I'm better to my neighbors. Of course, that's the whole job of mine here, Sorry.
Yeah, so we're bringing in the humility piece, right? If we look at this holiness code, what about it makes it a holiness code, right? It's giving us, again and again, God is saying, I am Adonai, do this. I am Adonai, don't do this. I am Adonai, do this. How is this, why is this called the holiness code?
It gives us a way of life that can lead us to holiness. If we follow these rules that are given to us in these 19 verses or whatever it is, I don't think it matters how we define holiness. It's how we act. It's our actions that I think help decide whether we're being holy.
So there's a few things in what you just said, right? That this is aspirational.
Mhm.
It, like these verses, it's something that we're working towards. Are any of us all of these things 100% of the time? I know I'm not. I'd like to be, but I know I'm not, right? And so perhaps there is this, just like God is imperfect and God is working toward holiness. I know that's kind of a big statement, but if we were to believe that, perhaps we in God's image are similarly working towards this aspiration of holiness.
Doesn't they say that right in the opening verse? I am holy, therefore you should be holy.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry if I made you dizzy doing that. Yeah, we see it right here at the very beginning of the holiness code. You shall be holy, for I, your God, Adonai, am holy.
That's enough reason.
Yeah,
Good.
right. God is giving us this kind of mission forward. And so,
God is
sorry, go ahead.
also God is also recognizing that we will not always be successful either. For me, because of stuff that's happened in my life recently, is the parts about families, and reconciliation within families and finding out more about your family and how it affects your life. That's actually hit several times in here. And that is a major part in my own life right now.
Yeah, so you can kind of feel that within the text.
Well, yeah, it's like, how long do you want to bear a grudge? How can you rewind it? How can you say this happened way back a long time ago? How can you say I was the witness and I am now the only witness of what happened within my family? How do I honor a father and a mother when a father, let's just say, wasn't a good father and his wife did not stand up to him on behalf of the children, and how that affects future generations and how that plays out in a family? I'm not a unique family. That happens a lot.
Yeah, but with the complexity of all of those interrelational pieces, all of the reverberations that our actions have, to be able to find our way to holiness in the midst of challenging places. I mean, this isn't easy.
And
it's a challenge of forgiveness. It's what the high holy days for me are all about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see where there's much discussion about forgiveness. It says honor, or
well,
I think she's referring to later on.
Yeah. Can I've had a hard time with the parent thing too. My parents were not good parents. My parents were drug addicts in Philadelphia, and they did a pretty horrible job raising us. And I'll tell you that where I come from now is that they did the best that they could with what they were given in this life. Like, that's the only way I can forgive them, is to know they did the best they could with the tools that they were given to live the life they lived. And now every time I think about that, I say I have to forgive them. So
yes, it's number 7. Yeah, it's number 17. You shall not hate your kinfolk in your heart. Reprove your kin, but incur no guilt on their account. That's very, very challenging.
Yeah, and the truth is that we could probably have a week's worth of Torah sessions on that one line alone and barely touch the surface. Yeah, Tom, what did you want to say?
No, I was just going to say, the readings in Musar, they were talking about using Hakaratov, to recognize the good, to help you, if the premise is every human being has redeeming attributes, and being able to, each of us are imperfect, and being able to recognize those goods and feel gratitude. Maybe that's not forgiveness, but it's kind of the focus is on, looking for in the practice of being higher individuals, looking, focusing on that to get through.
Yeah, and that's exactly where we're going in just a minute, to all of those texts. Thanks, Tom, for recentering us a little bit, because I think that's exactly what we're talking about. Yeah, Jessica.
I just wanted to say, I was thinking about which of these could be left out. Is this a complete list? And I think it is, except for the sacrificing one. I think it's a complete.
Yeah. I definitely could have gone ahead a little bit on that one, right?
List of how to live. That's it. I'm done.
Yeah, and there's 613 commandments, right, that pertain to all sorts of different things, but this is a pretty good list right here. Yeah. This is a pretty central one.
I think you could expand that when you're talking about family to unity as well, or even the country. I mean, you can make it as broad as you want. You don't have to just be good to your family or consider what's good for you.
Yeah, and Ruth Messenger teaches a lot about that. right? She teaches about the spheres of influence and how we open it up, that we start here, but hopefully we open it up to all humanity. As we're reading Torah, we have to understand the context in which it was written. And then understanding that original context, we can expand it based on our knowledge and understanding and interactions in the world today. So I want to bring us into Hakaratov and into Rabbi Gervis's commentary on this portion. So he talks about exactly what Tom brought up a few minutes ago. Giving thanks is essential to Jewish tradition's view of how we interact with our world, with our fellow human beings, and with God. I believe we should look beyond Hakarat HaTov as simply giving thanks for the good, which some people translate it as. And in so doing, we can acquire an additional quality with which we can navigate our lives and relationships. If we read Parashat Kedoshim beyond the simple understanding of Hakarat HaTov as gratitude, we can open ourselves to being more mindful of the good that is both present and possible in our lives. With this additional layer, Parashat Kedoshim can become more than a checklist of behaviors and attitudes by which we are called to live. Read through the lens of Hakarat HaTov, seeing the good that is present, seeing our strengths, even in the midst of our struggles and imperfections. Parashat Kedoshim can help us to summon the courage and strength, not to mention the will, to reach higher toward the good and the holy. We live our lives in the context of a world and relationships that challenge our striving to do good and be holy. Any thoughts or comments on this? It chimes from the heavens. It sounded so angelic. It was beautiful. Well, let's look at the next one from Alan Marinis while we kind of take that in. So he says the Hebrew term for gratitude is Hakarat HaTov, which means literally recognizing the good. The good is already there. Practicing gratitude means being fully aware that the good is already yours. So does this resonate for you? Or do you have a reaction to it?
Well, to me, it means that even if something is not, if something's bothering you, you're suffering with something, you should still be thankful for the good that you do have, which in the end could be as simple as your life itself, that you have opportunity to overcome that which is not good, but you should recognize the good. It's sort of a way of not being depressed all the time over everything that's wrong in the world.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brian.
I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, this is, at least in my own life, like I deal with a lot of declining health and stuff, and it can be pretty hard when you're in pain and lost new functionality to like feel good about things. But that is an important reason why I study this, which is that sometimes you do just get to be thankful that you're alive and recognize like that you still have these things, even if there are certain things that you would like to have more than that. And there is power in that, because you can focus on what's really terrible in your life, or you can try to find a way to move forward and look at what's good. And it just makes me think a lot always of Hagar and Ishmael and her falling down to her knees and crying and believing she's going to die, and then telling her to open her eyes and her seeing the well, and that it wasn't necessarily something God created, but just the ability to see forward, see a path forward.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. There's two quick caveats that I want to give. One is that depression is a real illness. And if you find yourself overwhelmed, I don't want anyone to read this text and say, there's something wrong with me as a human being because I'm not able to see the good. If what you have is an illness that needs help, that is not negative on you as a human being. That just means, just like if you had the flu, then maybe it's time to talk to someone to help you to get through it. That's really, really important. And also, if we don't always look for the good, if sometimes when we're having a hard time, We allow ourselves to feel that. As long as it's not overtaking our existence, that's okay too, right? This isn't a deny all your feelings and always try to be happy. That's not healthy either. This is just a, hey, if we're having trouble trying to find the good in our lives, how can we go about that? How can we try to change that? Maybe that means talking to a doctor. Maybe that means trying to create more time to meditate on the good and the gratitude for things that is already is there before our eyes, but maybe we can't always see. So, yeah.
We used to call that the power of positive thinking. To see the good.
Yeah.
My perfect example, years ago, a really dear friend's son was taking a pilot check ride, and he was asked to do a maneuver at the wrong altitude, and the plane crashed, and he was burned literally from the waist up. His ears melted off. He was in a coma for months. His mom wrote a book recently about that experience. But as they're walking out of the hospital, when he has no ears and his fingers are fused together, he looked at his mom and he said, I know I look like hell, but I'm so grateful to be alive.
Such strength in being able to do that, right?
Courage and strength, right.
And sometimes it requires help from friends and family. And in the COVID time, that has been very difficult for many, many of us who do not live near our closest friends, or family.
Absolutely. And community can be so, so important. So when I have this list, I have this text from Bachya Ibn Pakuda from a few centuries ago up on the screen, right? It wasn't written in modern times. But what he does is he explains that every single person has gifts. There's good that's all around us, even if that gift is just the gift of being alive, the gift of being able to, interact in the morning, whatever it is, right? But that sometimes there are things that get in our way of being able to see those gifts and understanding that this is not a complete list. This is what he wrote in his own time. These are the things that he identifies as different stumbling blocks to being able to see the good. So one, he explains that we can be too absorbed in worldly things and that physical and material pleasures can never fully satisfy us, right? We might want that new iPhone. We get the iPhone and then, we're not fulfilled by it. We want the newest and greatest kind of model or whatever it is. That's a very material kind of example, but there could be lots of them. And that this endless pursuit of gratification can keep us from appreciating what we do have. That we're putting these false, if I just get this, everything will be okay. Well, that's not necessarily going to fully fulfill, right? The second one that he points out is that we can become so accustomed to the gifts that we have that we can take them for granted, or we can become blind to them. That if we, like, for example, with COVID, right? We're so used to the ability to walk outside without masks on, to be able to go to places without worry of illness for several of us. That's not true for everyone, but that was true for many of us. And then all of a sudden COVID hit, and those things that we took for granted, we could no longer take for granted. And then we recognized it. But at the time, perhaps we didn't. We just kind of took those gifts for granted. Number three, there's a human tendency to focus on the negative. Certainly that's in our news cycles, right? That's what gets readership, is you put something negative out there, people want to find out what happens. So we focus on the negative rather than the positive. Rather than emphasizing the good that others bring into our lives, we waste too much energy, he taught, focusing on others' mistakes, focusing on the things that went wrong. And so I'm just kind of curious, looking at this list, what do you think of what he came up with? Is there something that's missing? Is there something he got wrong? Is there something that he got right? Rabbi Catherine.
I think that there's something that's missing, and I know I'm not the only person who beats myself up where I look at my negative instead of my positive. And I think that his third thing here is very true, but it's also true of ourselves. And we need to admit that and look at it. I mean, I just spent most of the last month flipping that one.
Yeah, and there's all of this really interesting kind of studies coming out about self-compassion, right? Dr. Ness wrote, did a lot of research on that. There's a few different people who have come out with really interesting research on that, and how we focus on the good in ourselves also is related to how we focus on how we see other people. Thank you for bringing that in. Anyone else?
I would say, go ahead, Irv.
I would just like to put in a good word for pets. I read this extraordinary book about a blind man who was very active in business, and was in the one of the towers was hit, and use of his guide dog and his experience escaping with the dog. And then that was only half of it, just getting out of the building. Then you had the building coming down, and then still struggled, and but it was life changing, and it was really zeroed in on it doesn't have to be a person. And I know a lot of people get a lot of comfort from their pets in times of need.
Yeah, so we can get support from pets as well as other human beings, and being able to feel that good.
I was going to say that the one thing I don't want to say it's missing or it's wrong, but I mean, it doesn't talk about helping others. Like it talks about how others bring stuff into our lives, or like what mistakes they made, but I don't see the key for me is always helping somebody else. So I didn't see that, but other than that, it's great. So.
Yeah, and that's such an interesting thing to bring in too, right? Because studies show, and maybe from personal experience, we feel that when we do good for others, it actually makes us feel really good too. And it helps us to focus on the good that is around us, to see the good in other people, because we have this mentality, this focus on what can we do to help. We notice the things that other people are doing to help too. It's a beautiful addition. I think that this piece, being incomplete as it is, right, is really a wonderful kind of starting point for us to think about in our own lives. Like, is there more that we could be doing to really focus on Hakaratov? Are these the things that are getting in our way? Are there other things, or the things that Frank and Rabbi Catherine so beautifully pointed out? Are those things that are getting in our way? And what can we do within ourselves in order to be able to embrace the good that is right before our eyes?
Yes, I like to tell a story. I was having trouble with a car, and it was in the garage for months. The battery was dead. The neighbor came over and offered to help. And yesterday he fixed it. I didn't ask him, he just fixed it. And I went out in gratitude and bought him his favorite chocolate chip cookies. That did wonders for me to even express that thanks and that gratitude. So working with others, seeing the good they do and how you can repay the good. That is really, and I think the last one says that. But emphasizing the good others bring into our lives.
Beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great story to be able to think of ways to just put a smile on one another's face. I don't know if you see the screen popping up. I'm trying to make it go away. There we go. So one text I wanted to bring in that just kind of came to mind that I was thinking about. It's not from this Torah portion, obviously, but it's something that I think can add to this conversation. If you remember the story of Joseph, this long, long story with Joseph, poor Joseph went through a whole lot in his life, right? And when we get to this section, Joseph finds himself in jail in Egypt. And He's there with the chief cupbearer. And this chief cupbearer tells his dream to Joseph and says, in 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale you on a pole, and the birds will pick off your flesh. Not such great stuff, but he interprets this dream, and that's what's going to happen. So on the 3rd day, on his birthday, Pharaoh made a banquet for all his officials, and he singled out his chief cupbearer and his chief baker from among his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his cupbearing, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand, but the chief baker he impaled, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not think of Joseph. He forgot him. And so when we look at this text, what it's bringing in for me to this conversation, right, is that here is Joseph who interpreted this dream for the chief cupbearer. Joseph who said, remember me and think of me and help me when the time comes, right? But what did he do? As soon as he got what he wanted, he totally forgot Joseph, totally dropped him. And so just kind of a reminder here too, that Hakaratov means being able to hold on to that gratitude, to be able to perhaps express that gratitude, and calls on us to think, are there times in which we haven't expressed gratitude for things for which we truly are grateful? Are there words that we haven't yet, offered to someone who has helped us in some way? Anyone have any thoughts on that, or is there something else that you get from this text?
Well, I think it's the same thing that I got from the earlier text too. It's the idea that we can't forget about everything else in the world. We can't just think about us. And especially, I think we see it especially in verse 23 there. The chief cupbearer did not think of Joseph. He forgot him. Mm-hmm. The chief cupbearer went right back to work doing the things he was doing and didn't have that gratitude to Joseph for giving him, for telling him the dream that he was going to be able to be saved. And it's a lesson that we try to teach our kids all the time, especially in religious school. And it's a challenge, especially in this day and age, to remind them that it's not just all about you.
Yeah.
I get that. There's one thing with this story that always got me is, and maybe where he says he forgot Joseph. Joseph didn't do anything. He just had a dream and told him, like, he didn't break him out of jail. Like, I always wondered, for a funny reason, like, Joseph just had a dream from Adonai that this was going to happen. Like, it was probably going to happen. But why, I don't know why Joseph gets so much thank you, or should get so much thank you. He didn't really break him out of jail, right? He didn't had a plan to build whatever. So I always wondered about that part, but still, he should be grateful for the vision to give him hope to get out. So, but
yeah, I mean, that's exactly how I understand it, Frank, is it's more of comforting him of, you'll get out of here, right? It's like that pastoral presence kind of a thing. I hope that how he spoke to the other one was a little kinder than it seems in this text, because that seems pretty harsh and not necessarily so pastoral there. But being able to give him some reassurance that, yeah, I believe you're going to get out of here, actually could help quite a lot. And then the forgetting, it might not even necessarily be a matter of thanking him, but Joseph was left behind. He knows what it's like to be in prison. He knows how disconcerting that was, not knowing his future. And now the chief cupbearer is out and just forgets him entirely. Doesn't think about how he's feeling as he's in prison.
I think also what happens is the cupbearer really wants to stay on the Pharaoh's side, and that he immediately, you say, I'm going to do this today. No, but I've got to get all this done because I've got to keep in Pharaoh's good. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow, and tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow does not come.
Yeah.
Well, this is just a preamble for Joseph's future.
Yes.
So it's the author's way of leading him into the big dream that gets him to be royalty.
Certainly, but everything along the way can have meaning in addition, right?
Sure, absolutely.
So a couple more texts to bring in here. This is from Pirkei Avot. And this is something that many of you probably have seen before. And if not, well, this is the first of hopefully many times. So Ben Zoma said, "Who is wise? He who learns from every man. As it is said, from all who have taught me, I have gained understanding. Who is mighty? He who subdues his evil inclination. As it is said, he that is slow to anger is better than the mighty. And he that rules his spirit, then he takes a city. Who is rich? He who rejoices in his lot. As it is said, you shall enjoy the fruit of your labors. You shall be happy and you shall prosper. And I could put in parentheses with what you have, right? You shall be happy in this world and you shall prosper in the world to come. Who is he that is honored? He who honors his fellow human beings." So what does this teach us and how could this relate to the understanding of Hakaratov? Does it relate to Hakaratov, to seeing the good?
I think we have a choice. I'd like to end my day with thanking God for what was good that day. And also recognizing what I did that made it a good day for me. There often you have goals for yourself and they somehow get lost during the day. And it is saying, this is he or she, who does these things that makes you look at a rounded picture, not just point.
Beautiful. So it gives some context, some grounding.
I love learning from other people. So I'm like right on the Ben Zoma thing. Yes.
Yeah, Jessica.
Well, I think where it says he who learns from every man, that is like giving every person the respect that one can learn from that person, and not dismissing anyone and not saying, oh, what do you know? You don't know anything, but realizing that everybody has something to teach, whether it is something small or not. And I think that relates to how was it, Hakaratov?
Yeah, perfect.
Yes, I think that relates to that, because you're recognizing the worth of every other person.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, who is rich? He who rejoices in his lot. So if you can, whatever level of money or possessions or family or experiences you have, if you can recognize and understand to be happy with what you have, that's recognizing the good of what you have, not what you want and what you hope to have, and all that is the key, right? So, Hakaratov, if you can recognize that and what you actually have, that's the key.
Yeah.
I always think you can learn even from like the handicapped,
Especially
Down's disease or any other. It's amazing what you can learn from people who are blind or deaf or mongoloid birth. It's amazing how the handicapped people can teach you so much about life. A lot of it's gratitude, but a lot is the example of how they approach life.
Yeah, I mean, every individual has so much to teach, right? With their own particular experiences and understandings and everything that they've gone through, everything. Everyone has something to teach. But if we look at this verse and we say, yes, he who's wise is someone who learns from every man, it is also telling us that we have something to learn from the person with whom we disagree about everything. And what if we approached people and said, okay, I don't agree with you about a single thing that I'm aware of. We come from very different backgrounds, very different realities, but I know you have something to teach me. Gives something to think about, doesn't it?
Yes.
There's a step before that, though, Rabbi, and that is you have to get on the same plane with that person. You can't have a demeaning feeling of that person, even though some of the things he did make you feel that way. If you don't want to communicate with a person, the first thing you have to do is get even with them, even if you detest them. You want to make if you're taking the effort to make any progress. Because if you place them beneath you for whatever reason, it's going to come across and there won't be any communication.
Yeah, exactly. There has to be this respect from the get-go. Right. And that's hard. That's a hard thing to overcome. But there it is right in the middle of the Holiness Code, or actually at the end of the Holiness Code. Right. Love your neighbor as yourself. Well, that means we need to actually have respect for another human being, just as we want people to show us respect as human beings.
I would like to recommend, just when we speak about happiness, there's a wonderful documentary called Happy, and it's done by various psychologists who go all over the globe and examine what makes some people happy.
It's interesting. It's also interesting, Sandy, as you say that, there's these surveys of different countries of where the happiest countries are in the world. And Israel is consistently very, very high on that list. And it has people kind of scratching their heads. Well, here we are in a part of the world where there's terrorism, where there's strife, where there's so much that's going on. How is it that Israelis are happy? And that's really a fascinating subject in its own right. But thank you for that. I've heard wonderful things about that documentary. Just a couple more text. Ooh, okay. I put a lot more text here. Clearly, we're not going through all of it. Story of my life, right? But let's do a little bit more. Alan Marinis. He said, when you open yourself to experience the trait of gratitude, you discover with clarity and accuracy how much good there is in your life. Whatever you are lacking will still be missing, of course. And in reaching for gratitude, no one is saying that you ought to put on rose-colored glasses to obscure those shortcomings. The obstacles to appreciating the good can also be very real, especially when life is riven by suffering. But it is worth the effort to practice gratitude, especially since the one who benefits most is the one who is suffering. Recognizing the good affirms life, and more because you see the good in the world, it sets your heart free to soar, to shout, to sing a song of life. A lot of power in that, right? We don't have to be happy all the time. We don't have to pretend that we're happy all the time. That's not real. But what is it like to be able to see the good even when we are struggling? Even some of the time. Throughout Rabbi Gervis's commentary, he includes little kind of commentaries on different verses, and I took them out from the text to be able to have it in this succinct presentation here. I want to see how much more text. Okay, I don't have that much more text, so perhaps we can do this. That Leviticus 9:9, right? When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. And he says, in my fulfillment of the sacred responsibility of tzedakah, can I see not only an extension of myself to others, but also an aspect of recognizing and acknowledging the good that I enjoy. Essentially, what Rabbi Gervis is doing is he's looking at the text and is saying, if I view it through the lens of Hakaratov, through finding the good, how can that lens help me to understand this commandment in a deeper kind of way? And so here he's saying that it's not just about doing something that's nice or doing something that God tells us. It's saying that I can actually recognize and acknowledge the good that I enjoy by offering it to others and taking on that sacred responsibility as well. It actually is giving to myself too. And there's something similar with the next verse. But the one I really want to focus on is going back to this, love your neighbor as yourself. Because what he says here is something that we've been kind of circling around, that he says, I may not love everything about my neighbor, but I can recognize, but can I recognize what is good in her? Can I use Hakaratov to appreciate and honor the ways in which she adds to our world? It's a pretty strong, hard thing to call on ourselves to do with everyone, especially when people are not necessarily affording us the same, the same thought process. Any other comments or thoughts on that?
Rabbi, I have a couple of questions slightly off the subject.
Yeah.
So you're teaching a beginner's course in Judaism, or are you teaching one now?
The Intro to Judaism?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
I think so.
Yeah, I finished teaching the Introduction to Judaism class, but I will be teaching a couple of classes coming up that you'll hear more about soon.
Are you incorporating any Musar into those courses?
I wasn't planning to, but I will give it some thought. It's not a bad idea.
One other quick thing, isn't it about time for our Torah portion, our Bar Mitzvah Torah portion, show up? Oh, you and I share one. I just wonder if this is it or next one.
Wait, sorry, I'm having trouble hearing.
Oh, yeah, this is my birthday month, and my Torah portion comes up, but I have a little difficulty in recognizing it. You shared that yours and mine were the same, and I just wonder which one it is. I forgot.
Oh, not so.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk after, Irv. We can chat about that for sure. All right, I'm going to bring us just to this last text, looking at the time. So Rabbi Gervis kind of ends with this note, saying, on the way, let us not lose the tov, the good within us, and that which arises from us. Rather, let us shine light with Hakarat HaTov and recognition of the good that is in us. Let us utilize that light as a foundation on which to reach higher and higher in our pursuit of living the ideals of our tradition. And if we could do that, surely that brings more holiness into our world. So at the very, very beginning of the session, I mentioned that there was good news, and I told some of you, but I'm going to tell it again for anyone who wasn't here right at the beginning, which is that all year we've been studying this Musar Torah commentary. And the person who put together the Musar Torah commentary, Barry Block, has offered to do a Torah study for us one of these Thursdays. So I'm working with him to set up a date to do in the very near future. And this way we can go through a Torah portion with him and also kind of learn from him in his own personal practice of how it is that Musar is helping him in his own life and what we might be able to learn from him as someone who has devoted so much of himself to Musar practice. So I'm really, really excited about that. And I'll let you know just as soon as I have that date completely down. But that's the good news.
Great.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you all so much for all of your questions and your insights and just your presence and being here. And next week, we're going to continue with our next portion in Leviticus. Irv, we definitely need to talk because the one you're talking about is the second Torah portion in the book of Numbers. So that's not so far away. So we'll have to make sure to be on top of that, but that's great.
Bye.
Bye.